Welcome back to the Space Salvi Institute podcast. I'm Andrew Petiprin.
And I'm Bobby Mixa.
And today we have a special episode for you where it's just the two of us having a conversation about one of our favorite filmmakers. And that person is Krzysztof Kieślowski, who is one of the greats of Polish cinema, one of the greats of European cinema, for my money, and I think for yours too, Bobby, one of just the all-time greats, period. When I was coming up kind of in the late 1990s and into the 2000s as a kind of cinephile and as somebody who was fascinated by Europe and foreign languages, the three colors red, blue, or sorry, blue, white, and red, I should say, the three colors series, which were Kieślowski's last movies, this, kind of maybe mid 90s into the late 90s, 2000s, you could kind of count on the fact that a lot of kind of intellectual types, people who are interested in cinema and that sort of thing, like people had seen those movies. They made a real impact on the kind of international film market, and they came out at a time when people were starting to have more access to like either VHS tapes or DVDs of movies that were made abroad, at least speaking for ourselves as guys who grew up in the United States. And one of the main things, Bobby, and I'll throw it to you now, but like, one of the main things that we see in those three wonderful films is this kind of wrestling with this question of identity in the post-Cold War world. So this sort of question of what is freedom now that we don't have the binary of kind of the West and the East anymore. But there's also this, I think, deeper question related to kind of love and human relationships, and also the life of the spirit that permeates most of Kieślowski's works, but is really on display, I think, in those last three films. So maybe before we dig into discussing the things we like about those films, and then kind of work backwards to other really important things he did as a filmmaker. Maybe you could start us off by just reminding our listeners and viewers of who he was and kind of what you make of him.
Yeah. Well, my introduction to Kieślowski was when I started dating my wife in Washington, D.C. I was trying to find a movie for us on a Friday night. And I found in the, I think, CUA library, they had the White film. And I didn't even know who Krzysztof Kieślowski was, but I'm like, heck, this is a Polish film director. Let's just see what this is about. And I couldn't tell you how much I laughed out loud watching that film, but also was so deeply touched in how profound the film was. And so I immediately recognized that this Kieślowski guy was like a filmmaker I had to know something more about. So I've always been looking on the lookout for Kieślowski films. I haven't seen all his films, but my real like deep dive into Kieślowski, besides the three color films, and we can talk about this later, but was the Decalogue, and I bought the Criterion version
Mm.
of that. And when I used to teach theology and philosophy at a Catholic high school on the north side of Chicago, I used to show some of these films. And what was so kind of captivating for them was just like the way that he could relate so many of the, like, for example, the Decalogue, but not ever explicitly mentioning any of the commandments. And that was something that I think Kieślowski was so good at is having that, if you want to say, kind of mystical core, but never and getting at certain themes, but without ever explicitly saying it. So like later I saw the three colors. I think I saw red, and then I saw blue, but I never finished blue. But like you said, Andrew, red was his last film. I think he filmed
Mhm.
blue first, and then white, and yeah, fine, and finished with red. And then he retired, and then he died after heart surgery, and he was
Yeah.
only 54 years old when he died. But a
Hmm.
little bit about the guy. I mean, he's just one of these greats, and a lot of people don't know much about Polish film, but it there's really something there to look into if you're kind of like a film connoisseur. I don't think the Poles maybe get enough attention, and they're really in some ways indebted to other schools like neorealism in Italy and some of the other schools in France. But In Poland, they had the Łódź Film School, which many greats like Andrzej Wajda, whose teacher was Alexander Ford. Polanski went to the Łódź Film School. Zanussi, Zanussi. Actually, I got Zanussi's phone number like a year ago. I called him up,
Yeah,
and
friend of our project, Zanussi. I met him at
yes,
the fall conference at Notre Dame as well, and we do hope one day we might be able to have him as a guest on our show. He's still alive and well and still making
I
movies, I think.
know. I yeah, I have to get. He invited me over to his house, but I need to get the microphone and like a real camera. He probably has a camera, right there in his house, so we could film something. But next time in Warsaw, maybe we can have a Zanussi interview. But Zanussi, when he was in charge of, I forget what the organization was called, but basically like the Polish Film Institute. The deputy was Kieślowski, and they had a real
Hmm.
connection, Zanussi and Kieślowski. And you know this, like the kind of the films that they were making. I think they called them like almost something about moral anxiety
Hmm.
filmmaking, in which they really delve into a lot of these themes, these moral themes. But all of these moral themes have this kind of mystical core to them. There's just much more there. Um, anyways, Kieślowski, yeah, he's a little bit, I think, younger than I'm not sure how much younger than he is from Vida, but yeah, a little bit of a different generation. He started off as a documentary maker, and it's worth you can go on YouTube and watch a lot of his documentaries, and a lot of them are they're not really commentaries on the social political scene, but he kind of got tired of making documentaries, and he didn't want to say anything explicitly about the social political situation of Poland. And I think he also too wanted to get out of documentary because one of his films, I think, was used as evidence against somebody in Poland. He didn't intentionally put this up on screen, but I think the communists used something somebody said against them, and he was very traumatized by that. Um, but then he got into film, and he wanted to, instead of making kind of explicitly political and social commentary films, like that like Vida did and some other filmmakers in Poland, he made films, I think he said, about relationships.
Hmm.
But within these films about relationships, he really does like get into kind of these. It's almost he's not explicit about it, but saying something politically, socially, but also I think like religiously. Um, I just want to like mention that in the first film of the Three Colors Blue, the song that the kind of the chorus of the song that what's her name, Olivier writes with their husband Patrice. You can go look all this up. Is a song for the unification of Europe and all these great hopes that Poland now has after the Cold War has joined. Schlossky's bringing this in here, but is now joining Europe, but this great hope for the future of Europe. But what he does is, and this is the Zbigniew Preissner songs. Zbigniew Preissner is still alive here in Krakow, actually. Fascinating guy. Not going to delve into him too much, but he, when he talks about the future of Europe, he talks about faith, hope, and love. He quotes Corinthians, and I've heard Slavoj Žižek says that you should read actually the three colors, which are, liberty, equality, and fraternity, with those
Hmm.
theological virtues in
Hmm.
mind as well. So Kieślowski, worth looking into. There's a great little documentary with him, and just basically a long interview with him called "I'm So So." Um,
Hmm.
and if you want to get to know the man, he described himself as a pessimist, but as many people said, he really wasn't a pessimist at the end of the day. There was
Hmm.
kind of this, if you can say, I would say an element of Christian hope, I think,
Hmm.
shining through.
Yeah, that's really all of that's really helpful. A couple of things came to mind as you were talking. The question of whether he's a pessimist is interesting to me because I know the Three Colors films quite well, and I know um, the Double Life of Véronique quite well, and some of the episodes of the Decalogue. I'm really coming to appreciate those now. um, in a way that, I mean, to even watch some of them now, and I hadn't before. Um, but before the Decalogue, I recently watched two of his movies from the 1980s, one called Blind Chance and one called No End. We can get into those a little bit more later, but both of those are quite pessimistic, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that both of them, and especially Blind Chance, really lays out this dilemma for an intellectual trying to get at the deeper things, living in a society that it appears is dominated by the binary of the church and the party, you know?
Mhm.
And I think that it's clear throughout Kieślowski's movies that he does not belong really in either one. Although there are aspects of both that he kind of maybe does, and it's interesting. But one of the reasons I thought it would be useful to start with the Three Colors movies, not only because it's likely more people have seen those, but that precisely as you say, I think in those films at the end of his life, which I think are his greatest films, I think that those films are so incredibly rich. Um, there is a real hope that permeates, and I don't think it's a kind of facile, hey, the wall is down and, you know, it's the end of history or anything like
Yeah.
that. I don't think that's the kind of hope that's permeating. I think that there is a real hope for Poland. I think there's a hope for Europe, but I also think that there is a sense that, this sort of I don't know, this almost kind of like it can be played in a very I don't know. It can be played in a very easy way, the whole kind of love conquers all theme.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, it's true, And like so this whole question that somebody like Kieślowski had to wrestle with throughout his career, living in a country like Poland during communism, and then watching that come to an end. I mean, this sort of basic question of how to live in the world, like how do we love under particular political circumstances? How do we relate to each other as inheritors of this faith? And what do we make of that faith? And all these kinds of questions, I think, are really there in the work that he did at the end of his life. And before throwing it back to you, I know we're going to talk about a little more about blue, white, and red, but I think the Decalogue is really important to note here too, because for one thing, it's on the Vatican film list, so it's in the book that I co-authored with David Paul Baird and Michael. Gosh, I'm totally forgetting my co-author's name. Father Michael Ward. Sorry, Michael, if you're listening. Um, and it was so it was on the Vatican film list. It came out in 1988, right before the end of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union. So before that, but that's the thing that really put him on the map in terms of people in France, people in Europe, and then ultimately people in the United States like came to recognize him as the cinematic genius. And also, what incredibly profound little movies he made in the strangest of circumstances there in his native Poland. And I mean, I really defy anybody who hasn't seen those movies, each of them, to watch them and not really get to the end of each one of them and just think, I I don't know, at least my feeling is when I get to the end of those, I just think it's perfect. Like the way you're watching this thing and it sort of this develops and that, and you're sort of disturbed by certain things or delighted by certain things. It's mostly pretty sad. But then you get to the end and you can't help but just kind of go, yes, that is the way that story ends. And like that sense of like the perfection of storytelling in that way is something that I truly have come to believe now, having watched now more of his films. It's the thing that I think he did better than anyone. I
Yeah.
really do think like he's at the absolute top of the heap in terms of his ability as a storyteller and through film.
Well, I mean, just take the end of Decalogue 1.
Yeah.
And I never actually I went after we talked to Bishop Barden last week, I went back and watched it and I never picked up on this and I've seen it a number of times, but that the mother, I mean, I know the thing that the mom is probably dead and that the father hasn't really said this to the son, but and the son is communicating with the mom kind of through this machine. But the last scene is I mean, it's not the exact last shot, but you have the icon of Our Lady, of the the mother
Well, he goes
of
into
the
that
little
kind of like
child.
weird outdoor church shrine or
Yeah,
something, and
yeah,
he knocks over all the candles, and he's
yeah.
all kind of, he's crying, and it's all kind of
She
violent, and
knocks down the altar, right?
yeah, he
And
knocks
then
over the
the
altar and all the candles, but then it focuses up, and the icon of Our Lady is sort of still there looking on him. Like the sense
yes,
I get is like you can destroy the stuff, but like the kind of the loving gaze is still on you, no matter how
yes.
desolate you feel.
And also too, these like if you look at his films, he's always dealing with what may seem to be coincidences.
Yeah, always.
Like
Yes.
you'll see in the Decalogue, there's always it's just in this, supposedly nice apartment in complex in Warsaw, and they're all people living in the same complex, and so characters will pass each other. You'll see this in the Three Colors films until finally at the end, and it's almost kind of like this, divine comedy moment where it's like all of them kind of come together at the very end. But and you said that the ending stuff is just what he is perfect
Hmm.
at. But in,
Yeah.
in the decal at the very end of the first episode, when you have then the tears of the mother, but they're like tears of sympathy,
Yeah.
and also too like the mother in Poland, there's a lot of devotion to the sorrowful mother. You'll see on that Our Lady of Częstochowa icon, there's like a big, huge, like looks like a big scar lash on her face that he zooms
Mm.
in on that. And I don't want to get into the history of that, but the Poles have always kind of internalized that as being part of their story. But you kind of sense, I mean, at least with Kieślowski, I don't. John Paul II said there's no coincidences, but it's providence, and I
Yeah.
feel like you have that in his films.
Yeah.
And at the end of each of if you look at the very ends of both blue and um, white, the characters are there's tears coming down uh,
Hmm.
their face, but yet there's
Hmm.
this little smile that they look like maybe tears of sorrow, but then they become tears of joy in a
Hmm.
way. And I was just listening to one of the cinematographers talk about the last scene of Red, which the first shot. Of the main character. I forget her name, but played by the wonderful Irene
Iran Jacob. Yeah.
Jacob. I mean, wow,
Yeah.
what a heavenly beauty, and somebody who purely too in the Red film kind of communicates that just that pure goodness. But
Yeah.
anyways, the last scene. Uh, and the first scene are almost the identical like side view of her face.
Yeah.
Um, and I was listening why Kieślowski didn't want to make a film in Hollywood was because he was told he wouldn't be able to be the director, the writer, and also the editor. And he was
Hmm.
involved in everything. So you could say that he truly all of these masterpieces are like fully his work. I mean, he's a true
Yeah.
artist in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's very much the prerogative of the auteur filmmaker, that you really do have to be able to have total creative control. And the editing is a really important part of that.
Yeah.
I mean, the greatest directors, if they don't edit their films themselves, they're sitting in the editing room every minute with the editor.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think like the stuff that you flagged already about the Three Colors movies, it's all really important. I wonder what you make of this. There's this quote that Kieślowski gave. Actually, if you subscribe to Criterion, there's a lot of good stuff, or at least it comes and goes, so it may not be there right now. But in the past, there were some things on there, including some interviews with Kieślowski, where he
Hmm.
talks about the Three Colors movies. And there's in one of the interviews, he said this. I'm going to read this quote. He says, "All three films start the same way, in the underpinnings of civilization and its technology." The first film begins underneath a car. The second begins with suitcases on an airport conveyor belt, and the third begins with the camera panning along electrical lines.
Hmm.
This is something that I think he explores in all of his movies. Technology and its effects on our ability to be human is something that we talk an awful lot about, Bobby. And I think that I've been drawn to Kieślowski's films for that same reason to some degree. I very much like that he doesn't beat you over the head with it, though. I think that it's quite subtle how he sort of shows stuff like that as kind of underneath. Likewise, in the Double Life of Veronique, what's kind of just in the literally in the background is the end of communism in Poland. I mean, it's like she's
Mhm.
walking down the street and they're like, pulling a statue of Lenin. It's like what, and that's really the interesting thing, isn't it? Is like how are people living amid the changes of the world? How are
Mhm.
people living and loving and kind of feeling free or feeling trapped or whatever that may be, aside from just the kind of, ideological talking points or even ecclesiastical ones. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that really, I think by the time he got to the Three Colors movies, he really knew how to explore those questions. In Blue, it's this like very sad story about a mother who suddenly loses her husband and child. And it's very much a movie about grief that does give way to a strange hope at the end. White is this movie, really funny in parts, about this Polish man married to a French woman who, gets rid of him. And, I mean, this is a family show, but I mean, this Polish man, while in France, is inept. He's impotent. He doesn't speak the
Only
language
after
very
they get
well.
married.
Only after they get married, right? Everything goes wrong. And he winds up hilariously back in Poland, and his star rises back in his home country. And that is just I think, a very interesting commentary on the relationship between Poland and, kind of other Western countries. And
But I
then
love the
Red,
scene when he gets to Warsaw though. And
yes,
I
yeah,
won't
let's talk
say
about
how
that.
he gets to Warsaw, but he looks out at the garbage heap.
Hmm.
And then he says, I'm finally home. And
Yeah.
I love that kind of like, for a lot of Poles, they could probably sympathize with that. Even though
Uh-huh.
it's a garbage heap, I'm so glad to be back.
Yeah.
But anyways, I
I
won't.
I think that there may be an homage there to Andre Vida, to his World War II movies, and maybe to Ashes and Diamonds. I'm
Oh
trying to
yeah,
remember
that's
off the
right.
top of my head, but there's something in, I think, in that movie, or maybe it's in
Well, at the very end,
now.
I mean, when what's his
Oh, of
name
course, right.
basically
Yeah,
dies in the garbage heap.
that's right. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a little bit of an homage there. Um, yeah, so that's terrific. And then the third one, Red, is back in that one's set in Geneva. So Blue is set in France, White is set in France and Poland, and then Red is set in Geneva. And that there, Irene Jacob plays she's a law student, right? Or
Believe
no, she
so.
her boyfriend is
The
the law student. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And then
I,
the guy who, it's like you have the judge, the old judge, but then you got
yes,
the other guy who they're always somehow in the same shot when they cross paths, but he's the young judge
that's right.
who then you
Yeah, and
explore
that's
his life. Yeah.
right, and that's
And
that's Jean-Louis Trintignant, who is
mhm.
is famous for being the
My night
star
at
of Eric Rohmer's My Night at Maud's, among many, A Man and a Woman. I mean, he's the star of many great French New Wave films. So I think it's like very significant that he's in Red. And you pointed out to me, Bobby, that there's something about Rue Pascal. There's something about
well,
that
yeah, well, okay, that's going back to Double Life of
in.
Veronique.
Okay,
I
yes, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I never actually saw the entirety of that film until a couple days ago. And it just stood out to me that I mean she keeps getting these packages from mysterious person who turns out to actually be the puppet master, who I believe that Kieślowski is actually kind of in all these films too, like through certain characters. Because if you look at them, but the if you look at the package, the address that it's to is always on Rue Pascal, and if you look, I mean, everything is intentional, like all the great directors. And it just jumped out to me that during this film, because the film, I mean, there's so many things going on in the film, but when I was watching this, even before I saw the Pascal thought thing, I was thinking the heart has reasons that, what is the line? The heart has reason that reason knows not.
Right.
That's the Pascal line. And always through Kieślowski's movies, and this goes back to even the Decalogue and all the others, is this kind of tension between this kind of cold rationality, um, and something that is in some ways, if you want to say, um, beyond that the realm of the mystery, um, that kind of our calculating reason can't comprehend. And so
Yeah.
that film, I mean, Double Life of Veronique, there's just so much we could probably possibly say about that. But I thought it was significant that the Pascal thing jumped out. Because if you read Pascal, I mean, he's there right in the 1600s when this there's the new Cartesian rationality that's coming about and the wrestling with the faith. But yeah, I was thinking that whether or not well, I do think he intentionally brought that in there. He
Right.
loved to
Yeah.
read Kierkegaard too. I heard that when who was it who mentioned that in actually the Red film, he was reading Kierkegaard's Repetitions book all the time because you'll see things repeat themselves, like again
Yeah.
and again, and we don't have to say that, but in blind chat. So this kind of, and Kierkegaard's another one of these like kind of, I mean, how would you describe Kierkegaard? Somebody who hasn't really kind of bought into that, if you want to say, calculating modern rationality,
Yeah.
is longing for something more.
Yeah, and I think so. I think so, various thoughts that I'm gonna just shoot out here that may not connect. But yeah, I hadn't thought about the Kierkegaard thing, and I think that, but I think that's really important. Kierkegaard was really important to Carl Theodor Dreyer, a filmmaker that no doubt Kieślowski was influenced by. And then Pascal was at the heart of Eric Romaire's movies. Now, Romaire ended up outliving Kieślowski by up quite a few years, but I have to think that Kieślowski was influenced by Eric Romaire, and I'm just now remembering as we're talking that Véronique of the Double Life of Véronique lives in Clermont-Ferrand,
Hmm,
which is where My Night at Maud's is set. And so
interesting.
and so she lives on Rue Pascal in Clermont-Ferrand. And so I mean that's like an obvious homage to My Night at Maud's. Um, so I just wanted to flag that as just an important connection there. And I do think that the philosophical underpinning, the kind of you know, Pascal's work is very important to Kieślowski's mind for the reasons that you said. The puppet thing in The Double Life of Veronique is really amazing. The scene, like there are a couple of puppet scenes, but the one kind of long scene where Veronica witnesses the puppet performance. And forgive me if
Hmm.
I'm not remembering this correctly. I didn't rewatch this before our conversation today, but I saw the movie maybe a couple of years ago, so it's not totally alien to my mind. But that scene, and it's a very unique kind of puppeteering. It's done by this guy named Bruce Schwartz, who's an American
Hmm.
puppeteer. And unlike the puppeteers who use strings or put their hands under the puppet, like the Muppets or something like that, you can see his hand on the table contorting the puppet. So you
Yeah,
see him
the
doing it.
hands. Yeah.
And yet you're totally captivated by it, and it seems so real. I mean, it seems like what he's
Hmm.
able to do with that. And I do think that to your point before about how Kieślowski himself is kind of in the films, like I think he's
Hmm.
very much showing us like, you know, sh sort of showing us behind the curtain of the creative craft. It's like I will show you my hand, and you will still find it captivating, which to me is a very powerful statement about kind of today's entertainment and art, But
But
anyway, go
he's
ahead.
also judging himself as a director. I feel
Yeah.
like he's wrestling
Yeah.
with that because, in the package that she gets, that you see the kind of Rue Pascal, is you
Yeah.
have this string, and you don't know if it's the string in the first part with like Veronica when it's the almost the identical woman in Cruckle because she breaks a string that's holding together her musical score.
Uh-huh.
At one point, but then it's also, but eventually you learn it's the string from the puppet strings.
Yeah.
And there's the moment when she finally meets the puppeteer at a cafe, and she realizes, and it's so mysterious how it's done, that she's kind of being manipulated. Like she
Yeah.
is this puppet that he
Yes.
has now been playing with the strings. And th
Yeah.
then he has to go find her again. And I'm not going to get into all that stuff, but I feel like it's Kieślowski. If you look at the glasses of the puppeteer, and when she first lays eye contact on him, he has these glasses like down here. They're almost the exact same glasses that Kieślowski has. And
Interesting.
also and also in the Red film with the judge, the
Yeah.
old judge, uh, he is in some ways he's listening into all of his neighbors. He's spying
Hmm.
on them.
Yes.
And it's almost like kind of a judgment upon Kieślowski. I felt like somebody mentioned
Yeah.
once that Kieślowski is that old judge. And there also was this not a relate. I don't think there was any relationship, no kind of like hanky panky between Irene, Jackie. How do you say her name again?
Jacob. Yeah. Irene
Jakob,
Jacob. Yeah.
and Kieślowski. But there's this kind of, if you want to say te like sexual tension between the two
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
But he's an old judge, and Kieślowski, I feel like as that judge is kind of almost judging himself as always being the one putting the camera on people. If you go
Yeah.
back to his film Camera Buff, one
Yeah.
of his feature films, the camera famously kind of turns around back to Jerzy Sturt, who's the actor who's with the camera all the time. And so instead of being that documentary director where he's capturing the lives of others, he's
Hmm.
now gonna turn it back upon himself.
Yeah.
So it's just
Yeah.
amazing how he does this in his films because it's and this is why he's so good because there's so many layers that anytime you watch a film, you're gonna go back and discover something new to it.
Yeah. Yeah, there is this sense that Irene Jacob's character and Jean-Louis Trintignant's character in Red are kind of like meant to be together. But
Mm.
there's also this sense of it's 50 years out of sync, you know?
Yes.
And the judge ends up becoming a very likable character, even though he's doing this thing that is quite awful and reprehensible in a way. And
Mm.
I do think that there's a bit of a judgment there on the artist. And similarly, I mean, Kieślowski does this in other places. For example, in Decalogue 6, which is the same as a short film about love. I mean, that's the movie that is sort of the Peeping Tom movie par excellence. And the entire time you're watching that one, you're sort of like, you're fascinated by it, by the woman, by the boy, the young man who's looking at her day in and day out, but also really revolted by it. And then in the very last scene, there's just this incredible, um, I don't know. I mean, it seems like it's sort of meant to be. It's like a grace that he looked at her and she let herself be looked at. And so there's something kind of redeeming about kind of, for the artist as well, in a similar way, like you see at the end of Red. And of course, at the end of Red, how does it end? But it's the judge watching on TV this young woman that he's come to kind of love, basically, along with all the other characters from the Three Colors movies, kind of being saved from a shipwreck, which
Mm.
I think has kind of obvious like sacramental, kind of biblical resonance, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
to me, it's like a very redeeming, like exclamation point on his career with that ending.
Yeah. Well, I heard that and they made these into movies. I don't think they were probably all that great movies, but after Red, he retires, but he was working on a screenplay for
Yes. Dante's Divine
basically
Comedy.
the Divine Comedy.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I mean, Miramax, Henry Weinstein,
Harvey Weinstein. Yeah.
Harvey, guys, what am I talking about? Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein, famously, he brought Kieślowski's films, Colors and Double Life of Véronique to America, but Tarantino and Weinstein were really into Kieślowski, and they brought him to Los Angeles, and he at that time, I guess he was working on that. The kind of the heaven, purgatory, and
Yeah.
hell screenplay. And he said when he came to LA that he knew now where he was going to have the setting of hell in his
Yeah.
film, which would be LA, which is so funny because like he came to America multiple times, and I think he was like a really European artist because he didn't like the kind of what he thought was empty talk in America. You can go
Yeah.
watch his documentary, I'm So So, and his little kind of comments about Americans always being always excellent. Everything is just great. Enthusiasm, which
Yeah.
but Kieślowski, yeah, it is interesting that was the last thing he was working on.
Yeah,
Um,
by the way, in case you didn't know, the the treatment that he did for the screenplay of Heaven did get made by
yeah,
Tom Tykwer. It's quite good. It's got Franco Potente and
okay.
Giovanni Ribisi. Not Franco Potente. It's
It's
got Kate
Kate
Blanchett.
Blanchett. Yeah,
Yeah, sorry,
I
Franco
haven't I
Potente
haven't
is
seen
in.
the film. Is
Yeah,
it
yeah, it's quite good. I There was a time when I was really into those. I still like Tom Tykwer a lot as a director, but he made it right in a row. He made Run Lola Run, Princess and the Warrior, and then he made
hmm.
Heaven. And Heaven, it is very good. It's sad and interesting. I really like it. I haven't seen it in a long time, but something really struck me when I was watching some of these earlier Kieslowski movies, especially Blind Chance, is that movie clearly influenced Tom Tykwer. I mean that because Blind Chance is about a movie told in three different ways. It's the same character who either makes or misses a train and the circumstances of making or missing it in those three scenarios completely transform his life in three different ways. So Kieslowski tells three stories based on that one incident. Again, you talked about coincidence before and how there are no coincidences. In one version, the main character, he wants to become a doctor when we meet him at the beginning. In one of them, he forsakes that life and joins the Communist Party. In another one, he forsakes that life and joins this kind of like Catholic underground movement. And then in the third one, he does become a doctor. And the end to all three of them are pretty sad, frankly, you know. But someone like Tom Tykwer makes Run Lola Run, I think, with the same kind of idea in mind. I think that Lars von Trier also was influenced by some of this stuff too. So anyway, I don't know where I was going with all that, except to say, just to flag here briefly that Kieslowski's influence, not
Hmm.
only on Tarantino and kind of this sort of I don't even know what to call it, but like this sort of new wave of auteurs that we got in the late 90s, the mid 90s, late 90s into the 2000s, that was super profound, even though he still presumably he could have really been one of them at the same time that he was influencing them if he hadn't died so young. I mean, my goodness,
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
46
it's
now as we're recording, and I'm thinking like, I sure hope I have my far and away my best work ahead of me still in my life.
mhm.
To imagine that it would all come to an end at 54, knock on wood. My goodness, what a horrible
Well,
thought.
yeah. It's this year, it's 30 years since his death.
Mm,
So yeah, he would have been 84.
yeah,
Um, and Zanussi is still, I mean, Zanussi I think is even older than him, and he's still quite active. Like
yeah,
you met him at Notre Dame last year, and he's still doing interviews all the time. So
yeah,
who knows what he would have continued to do.
yeah. And I mean, I don't want to dominate here, but I don't know if I could editorialize for a second and say, you had a great Twitter post the other day, kind of comparing Andre Vajda to Krzysztof
Hmm.
Kieślowski, and we might also include um, Zanussi, maybe less so Roman Polanski, because Polanski ended up, leaving Poland and becoming, I
Yeah,
think, a completely different kind of filmmaker, really. I mean, I think he made great movies, frankly. A lot of them
yeah.
are really good. But especially comparing Vida, who is really kind of kind of this sort of great of Polish cinema, to Kieślowski, um, I just find myself favoring Kieślowski
Oh,
so much more. I mean, just and not to take anything away from some of Vida's films.
yeah.
The three World War II films are terrific movies. I mean, they are
Mm.
really Ashes and Diamonds in particular is just a dynamite movie.
Hmm.
Um, but some of his other ones, I don't think he doesn't really do for me what Kieslowski does.
Well, okay, so I actually got that insight by listening to the little Slavoj Žižek video in which he's with these Poles and Warsaw. I think he came to Warsaw a couple of years ago, which is so it's actually kind of funny to watch this when he's going around Warsaw. But he's telling these Polish guys that he had a conversation with I always forget her last name, but Agnieszka Holland is another famous, kind of moral anxiety filmmaker, and in which she said that Vida was kind of, continued to make these political films. Vida got very much involved in politics. In fact, the famous newspaper, one of the most famous newspapers in Poland, called Gazeta Wyborcza, under Adam Michnik, that all Poles will know who Adam Michnik is. It's worth looking him up, and you'll get a sense of the complexity of the solidarity movement with Adam Michnik. But Gazeta Wyborcza was founded at Vida's house in Warsaw, and so he was very much politically involved. And even though uh, Kieślowski made pretty, overtly kind of political documentaries, etc., he's critical. By the time of the end of the Cold War, once it's they have this kind of newfound freedom and they're just starting again. He's not making political films. And I think some of people were very, like Vida was very critical of that.
Hmm.
But Vida, I mean, yeah, if you look at Vida's stuff, I mean, I've tried watching Ponte Deus, I think, which was made in like 1998, and it's just
Yeah,
really
tell everybody
not
what
that
that is, because
great.
that's like a kind of national
Yeah,
story, right? And
well,
he made a movie about it, and it's set in kind of Napoleonic times. And say something
yeah,
about
yeah,
that,
yeah.
because
So
I
like,
had never really even heard of it,
yeah, so
but it's a
actually,
huge thing for Poles.
oh yeah, I'm collecting all the time. Whenever I found this for 6 zloty, which is like $2 or less in Poland, I'm collecting all these Mickiewicz, all these here. Let me just open this Mickiewicz writings. There's like, I mean, like sometimes you're like, man, I thought maybe he just wrote like one big, epic poem, and then it turns out there's
Uh-huh.
like 15 volumes of his
Yeah.
collected writings, and so I'm like trying to collect these things. Hopefully someday my Polish is fluent, but. Miscavige, you like look at these sideburns. That totally, yeah, Napoleonic times and into romanticism. But
Yeah.
Miscavige is Pentateuch is like the kind of epic poem for Poland. And Vida was like known for taking a lot of these kind of classics of Polish literature and making them into films. Um,
Hmm.
but by the time and Pentadeuch, I don't want to get into any of that, but Poles have to memorize. I think the current education system doesn't have them do that anymore, sadly. But uh, every Pole could recite for you the beginning of Pentadeuch. Oh, Litwał, jak jest zdrowo, oh, Litwał, you are like health, and it's
Hmm.
just praising, and it's kind of very romantic, but. Um, Anyways, Vida, by the time he made Pantadeus, you could just tell that it's just over. I mean, all the other kind of films he made
Hmm.
after that were just so-so. But yeah, it's kind of nice to see that Kieślowski just goes out with a nice kind of bang, like with a real masterpiece. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
I
and
don't
he
know. I
always had,
don't.
I mean, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, no. I was going to just apologize for kind of rambling on there.
No, no, I really think that's important. Because I think we're not trying to denigrate other filmmakers by praising Kieślowski, but I mean the comparisons inevitably happen. I mean it's sort of like if you like Jean-Luc Godard, what do you make of François Truffaut,
Yeah.
or Eric Romer for that matter? Like to me, I mean it's sort I mean I don't know, it sort of depends on a number of things, but it's sort of inevitable that there will be these comparisons. An interesting thing about Kieślowski was, as you said, he made documentaries at first. He goes to film school and then he makes these documentaries, which in one way are very much in line with the kind of communist ideology and aesthetic. It's these documentaries about kind of ordinary people and kind of, you know, not romanticizing them, but not condemning them. It's this, sort of, behind the Iron Curtain realism kind of thing. But then you sort of realize, even when you go back and watch those, that's not really what he's doing. Like what he's really trying to do is just sort of show you people and like
Hmm.
find some way without being heavy-handed like Hollywood movies are, like what the human experience is like. And so, when he talks about making movies under communism and changing over to making feature films instead of documentary films, he made this movie Blind Chance in 1981. It didn't end up getting released until 1987 because of the turmoil of solidarity and martial law and all that sort of thing. And um, and then he makes this movie No End, which is like this movie about this woman whose husband dies, and you find out that her husband has been kind of defending this solidarity guy in a courtroom, and everything kind of works out for that guy at the end, but then the woman herself basically despairs of reality nonetheless, so
Hmm.
it's this weird thing that he's sort of doing in these movies, that like how he's engaging, like how he's telling these stories of these people living in these conditions. um but he says, here's a quote from him. He says, "We were truly important precisely because of censorship." He says,
Yeah.
"We're allowed to say everything now, but people have stopped caring what we're allowed to say."
Mm.
So then by the time he makes, I think, the Decalogue, the Double Life of Veronique, and then definitely the Three Colors movies, it's like he's stepping back and saying, "Okay, I could say whatever I want. Whatever I want. Not only can I get away with it in Poland, but I'm the darling of these like French backers who want me to make these movies. Harvey Weinstein's going to make sure that Americans see them or whatever. So what am I going to do with my freedom? I'm going to put a scene of a woman looking at coffee seeping into a sugar cube. Why? Because that to me is an expression that is a woman alive. Like that is a woman that in that scene you see a woman like living through the inexplicable, you
Hmm.
know? And in Kieślowski's artistic mind, it's like that sugar cube soaking up that coffee is how to show the world that turmoil, you
On
know?
YouTube, you can find him talking about
Oh yeah.
filming that scene and just
Yeah.
look at the detail and like how many
Yeah.
times he actually filmed the sugar cube filling up with the coffee and how precise he is.
Yeah,
But go on.
he actually said it wasn't like he said that, he filmed it many times the way it like how long it really took for the coffee to saturate the sugar cube. And he kind of thought, no, I think like from the perspective of this woman's emotional state, it would look just a little bit faster than that. Not much so it's like he sped up just that one part. I mean, it's just genius, and it also reminds me of the end of the Double Life of Veronique, which he said Americans didn't understand.
Hmm.
And I think it's so funny because we were talking before about how Veronica realizes that she's kind of on some level like she is like a puppet, like or that that there's she I don't know. I mean, it's complicated, right? But like, so the end of the movie then is her going home to her father. Like that is the place where you are not going to be a puppet. That is the place where like the world can't control you,
Hmm.
where you're not prey to the even these like the confusions about how you're supposed to feel necessarily, you know?
Hmm.
And it's this sort of homecoming thing. And he said Americans just didn't get that. Like,
Yeah.
what is she doing? She's gonna go see her dad at the end, and then the credits roll? What? What does that
And her
mean?
dad sensing that, because the
Right,
whole thing is like she senses this connection, but
right.
the dad sensing the connection that she's back, and also her putting her hand on the
On the
bark.
tree or on the
Yeah,
mark. Yeah, that's right.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting too. Yeah, I maybe we can explore this too because I think that some of the Americans, you mentioned the technology thing too. I was listening on my way home today. I was listening to the book by Jacques Ellul. What is I forget the technology one. What's it called?
The technological age, is it called?
The
No,
tech, yeah,
the
the technology. Anyways, it'll come back to me. But what I read, the foreword was done by Robert Merton, the famous sociologist, and he was contrasting, Jacques Ellul and many other European thinkers who the kind of the age that we're in, the tech kind of the what they mean by technique at being kind of at the heart of this. A lot of Americans just just didn't get it, and he was contrasting kind of American scholars and some of the European ones. But it does seem to me that there is something that Kieślowski, you kind of think about kind of a straightforward story that doesn't have all these different layers to it. And this is not to, I mean, heck, I'm an American, so it's not to denigrate America as if they're not capable of that.
right, right.
I don't want to sound like that, but nevertheless, there is something there, that kind of mystical core that I think he's very much attuned to without ever being explicit about it. That I think is key. Can I also just say something too, like about the way that he what was this here? Um, hmm. Hold on, I lost my
Well,
train of thought.
can
Maybe you
I
can,
jump in real quick while you're thinking and
yeah.
just put a little addendum on what you just said, kind of about the difference. Yeah, again, we're I think we're capable. Lots of Americans are capable of sort of understanding what an art, a European filmmaker is doing. But I do think it's significant um, that someone like Kieslowski is making movies about internal struggle that we certainly have as Americans, but the kind of the overriding ethos of American society is that we really don't want to dwell there. You know,
Hmm.
like, and that comes through even in our movies. Like the character has a struggle, but like it really has to be understood that that's something to be conquered, and that it's not this sort of lingering like I mean, quite honestly, Bobby, yeah, I think it's like we get this is something we've said so many times before, but I mean, it's about hope, not optimism. It's about like some sense of like this overarching understanding of one's being in the world that right that isn't just a kind of like, fitting the script of overcoming obstacle, achieving success.
Yeah. Oh, can I say in Red, there's
Please,
that
yeah,
scene between the old judge and I'm forgetting her name, um, but he tells her something like he tells her just be, and there's this silence, and there's something completely like liberating in that scene, and also this thing because he's talking about relationships and kind of, yes, just dwelling with the other. And there's always this sense of responsibility in his
yeah,
films. Like he's
yeah,
always in some ways responding to the other. But and like because you
yeah.
see it in each of those three films, in blue and white and red, there's an old woman or somebody trying to put a
A
can
bottle.
in a
Yeah.
bottle, and
Yes.
the first two they're struggling. They just watch. Like the first one, she doesn't even notice the old woman doing it. The second one, Zamahowski, the actor, like kind of like because since he's going through so much, you know, shit, he kind of sympathy, he kind of smiles like this person is going through the same struggle as me or some kind of, and then in the third one, she comes and helps the old lady.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah, I think that's right.
but
I think that there is this, I think a part of this is this sense of like being awake, being um like sort of using this sort of internal struggle as the kind of challenge to be awake and alive in the world. There's a part when, so you mentioned this conversation. By the way, her name is Valentine
oh yeah, Valentine,
in
yeah.
Red, and she
Hmm.
says to the judge, "It feels like something important is going on around me, and it scares me." You
Hmm.
know, and don't we all have that feeling? Like if we're honest with ourselves, and I think like you see this in all of Kieslowski's work, like the coincidence thing, like some sense of like what's going on. There's something I have to figure out.
Hmm.
And this ultimate, like I think in Red, really, it really does kind of culminate in that character's awakening.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I mention just the sound director that he worked with? Mentioned that Kieślowski was so intentional with the music, but what he
mm,
loved the most was just he called it the sound of silence.
yeah,
He didn't there were certain moments and he said he was perfect in how he did this. He just didn't want any sound. And he's contrasting that with some other filmmakers that just want and this expectation of the audience to just fill the movie in with a lot of like music. Uh,
yeah.
and I felt like the sound director was kind of saying like that was like that Kieślowski was comfortable with just dwelling in the film and dwelling in the whatever the encounter or relationship is that so much of us were trying to kind of like flee.
Yeah.
Um,
And he does use music. Famously, I mean, Preisner's music is like
mm,
synonymous with Kieslowski's films.
yeah,
So it's not like some realist filmmakers don't want any external music in their movie, like the Dardenne brothers, for example, of Belgium.
yeah,
Kieslowski absolutely did, but he also has these long scenes where nobody talks, or and not to say, I mean, his movies aren't long, really. His movies are
yeah.
all like 90 minutes, not really that long, but he still has these scenes where I just think of a number of them in blue, like where she's swimming or where she's looking at blue things like a crystal, or she's just kind of sitting forlorn or watching the sugar cube or whatever it is. And there are similar scenes in the Double Life of Véronique that come to mind. Um, there's a kind of fearlessness about that. Like I am not afraid of silence, as you just said. I'm not making a movie to fill space. I'm not trying to divert your attention from something else. I am trying to focus your attention on this human
Mm,
being I'm pointing my camera at.
yeah.
And you mentioned the kind of erotic part, like the kind of eroticism um of the Double Life of Veronique and Red, maybe a little bit like the Irene Jacob thing.
Mm,
And I found a quote or something somewhere, I don't have it in front of me, where like if you watch No End, for example, there's a very almost kind of brutal sex scene in that one. I mean, it's not
mm,
erotic. It's very hard to watch, and it's this
mm,
woman who's sort of despairing, just kind of saying whatever. I'll just submit to this awful thing.
mm,
And but I do think that in these later films there is a kind of erotic in them that is missing from the earlier work, and I think it's bound up in this whole kind of um I don't know how I started going down this road. Where what led us down here? I don't remember, but just sort of, I
mm.
don't know, capturing sort of the
Well,
human thing.
I think too that, we had Bishop Eric Varden on last week, and I've been thinking a lot. He wrote a book on chastity, but if you read John Paul II, and I don't know why I'm just constantly putting John Paul and Kieślowski together. I don't, but John Paul II wrote a book on love and responsibility, and then his famous, theology of the body. But if you look at that, a lot of it is how you look at things,
Yeah.
like looking at things chastely, like
Yeah.
attending to the world, but attending to the world as disclosed, like with a sacramental vision of
Yeah.
things. And I think that, like, I know a lot of people sometimes are very, very much against that, like nudity in any film. But the way he captures it kind of at the end there is there is it's a different way of presenting and looking that's different. And I don't know, this past week I've been looking at a lot of kind of like Vermeer's paintings, and I didn't know that he became Catholic. I mean, they say primarily because of his wife, but if you look at him, his painting, they're very ordinary things that he's capturing in the everyday,
Hmm.
but yet there's this kind of aura around them
Yeah.
that yeah, they're like in a way like disclosive. There's something more. There's like a
Yeah.
sacramental dimension. And I just find watching Kieślowski films, there's something similar
I
in
think
that.
it's an admiration. It's admiration of a subject
Yes.
rather than kind of trying to grasp an object. And
Yes.
that is something that I think very few filmmakers are good at today. I
Hmm.
don't think that I think that
Hmm.
there's, um, I think it's really hard not to either be just almost unrealistic about the kind of sensuality of real life,
Hmm.
or you just make pornography. It
Hmm.
really there's really no the in between, the kind of the real sense of like this sort of soulful encounter with bodies is something that Kieślowski nailed at the end of his life. I think that he
Yeah.
just got that so perfectly. Tarkovsky, obviously, like
What
he gets that. I mean, there are certain filmmakers who just nail that.
Wasn't there a woman who wrote to Kieślowski and said, after watching Double Life of Veronique, I now believe I have come to truly believe that I do have a soul, that I have a soul
Yeah, I
watching that.
believe it.
And yeah, and I think yeah, like you said, I think it's not just subjects, and this is maybe getting at this kind of like relate this maybe a little bit of a critique of modernity, going back to the Jacques Ellul thing, this subjects basically dominating objects, but
Yeah,
now in some ways it being no, subjects meet subject, and that's
that's
where
right.
yes, it's an object, but yet a subject, and there's this kind of fruitful encounter between the two. I think that
Yeah.
if you have to put that in filmmaking, I think he captures that well.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of freedom and love thing that he ultimately was pretty preoccupied with, as a contrast, I do think, to the empty promises of technology in the post-Cold War age.
Yeah.
Um, well, Bobby, we're about out of time here. Any final thoughts about this great artist that we've decided to kind of sit down
No,
and chop
just
it
to
up
encourage
for an
people to
hour?
go watch Kieślowski.
Yeah, which one
So
would you recommend first? People ask me that sometime. Which one, what would you tell people to watch first for
I
Kieslowski?
don't know. I still like with the Decalogue one. I have to say,
Mm,
every time I
yeah.
watch it, I choke up. And again, last week, uh, I just started. I couldn't help myself. I started
Uh,
crying again.
yeah,
I I, I
it's
would start
devastating.
with that, but also, I mean, I think that to get a sense of the man, go watch I'm So So on YouTube. You could just quickly go watch that. He's quite the
Yeah.
character. He's quite a character. And
Yeah.
I just always really liked I still like the white film. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
pretty funny. And what's his name? Zbigniew Zamachowski is just kind of quite comical in the
Yeah.
film. So I really enjoy that. So,
Yeah,
but
I
I
think
would
I
begin
almost would.
there.
Yeah, I think I almost would recommend White first, just because it's funnier, and it's just sort of it's got a charm to it that isn't that characteristic actually of some of his other movies. But I think I would also I don't, it's hard to say, but I might actually recommend, and I myself am feeling like I need to go back and rewatch The Double
Hmm.
Life of Veronique, because I see that as a really interesting bridge between the Decalogue and the Three Colors movies. I
Yeah.
think that it's interesting how it sort of looks back at the Decalogue in certain ways and forward at where he's going to go with the Three Colors movies. And it's sort of a nice It's a nice self-contained movie, and the whole kind of double thing is something that I think a lot of people who haven't seen that movie will just find instantly like attractive. They'll want to keep watching to kind of find out if they're, how this is going to play out, right? So I would
Yeah.
recommend that one. All right. Well, on that note, thanks everybody for listening and watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do. Thank you for all of you who have done so. We've been seeing our subscriptions going up lately and our engagement going up. We really love to see that. Please do leave us a comment. What's your favorite Kieślowski movie? If you're a fan or if you have reservations about him, let us know about those too. If you have any questions, we'd love to answer them. We'd love to engage with you there. You can check out our website at spacesalviinstitute.com. And there's even a place there where you can make a donation to our project. So we'd love to welcome anything that you can spare. So for Bobby Mixa, I'm Andrew Petiprin, and I encourage all of you to live in hope. And until next time, God bless.